What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. We are literally days away from the NFL Combine. I'm excited to be there in person in Indianapolis. We got draft season in full swing, man. But we got a very fun episode of the podcast today for you guys. We're going to be breaking down our top 5 running backs of the 2025 draft class. So this is a really good group, man. A lot of talent, a lot of top end talent, but a lot of depth throughout this class. And it's really been a joy to study. So we're going to be sharing a ton of our strengths, weaknesses, for these guys, how we think they'll translate to the next level, and just kind of a general peek, I feel like, behind the curtain for our scouting process for this position. So first things first, Nick, how we doing, brother?
Oh man, I'm doing great. We're on the cusp of combine week. We're starting to talk about running backs. Running backs is probably my favorite position this year. I've been looking forward to this class since last year, and just like some of these guys have just impressed me so much. It's hard. It's so hard because number 5 for me, just figuring out how to rank it. It was just like I was consistently just like conflicted on who to put there, and it's a testament to how great this class is in terms of its depth.
Yeah, I mean, you were really high on this class coming out of the summer. I think it's safe to say that this group probably exceeded your expectations. I know it exceeded mine, and I had some lofty expectations for this group coming into the season. It just felt like everything fell in place for a lot of these different guys, and it's been a joy to kind of watch through. Just, I watched about 12 guys or so for this exercise. Like, that's how many like scouting reports that I kind of finished, grades that I kind of placed. My threshold for this kind of thing is usually I have to watch at least 3 games. For the top end guys, I usually watch more just because I'm having fun doing it, so I might as well put on some more tape. But full disclosure to everybody kind of listening, Nick and I didn't share our rankings with one another until about 30 seconds before we hit record on the podcast. So it'll be pretty fun to share this with you guys. But I'm going to let you go first, man, to kind of get your number 5 off. I have a little bit of a curveball, so I'm kind of curious to hear you talk about your number 5 on your list.
So number 5 for me is Quinshon Judkins out of Ohio State, formerly at Ole Miss. This was actually a surprise for me because I've always been very conflicted on his game. I've always thought his vision is not always the best in terms of decision making. Sometimes he doesn't see the necessary cutback lane. But what I couldn't quit on was his tenacious running style, which is how I would just describe it. It's tenacious. Like, you've seen his stiff arm. It is one of the most violent stiff arms you'll see. Like, he'll absolutely throw guys back, even at the first level. A really nice detail I've seen with him is consistently when they run the ball to the outside, he always has the ball on the outside arm. He leaves his inside arm free, and it allows him to just like stiff arm guys and then eventually, make his way out of bounds. There's a little bit of a discrepancy that some have about his long speed, and I think I don't think this is a question with him. I just think it's more so, will he be able to consistently house plays? No, he won't, but he'll be able to create plenty of explosives. And I think more so it has to do with his vision, because like, if you watch the Notre Dame game, that cutback that he makes on that counter play, you don't see that very often. You don't see that very often in his tape where he finds that like backside cutback lane correctly, and he, sprinting to daylight. That's the thing with me with Judkins. I think he's just got huge explosive play capability. He's very strong moving laterally in terms of, I don't necessarily think he's the most fluid. He's just really twitchy. He's able to string moves together. There's a lot of like energy to each move he makes. And then you watch him block. There's so much like enthusiasm about blocking, almost too much, or to the point where he'll like overextend, like just to get that initial contact in, and he ends up just like completely whiffing on a guy. But like he you could tell he embraces contact. He loves the sport in terms of being physical. And that's something I respect a lot about Judkins' game, is that vicious, tenacious style to him. And I think his vision showed aspects of improving down the stretch to the point that I feel decent enough about making a potential projection to the next level of that aspect of his game improving. I do think he's better in a gap scheme right now as opposed to a zone scheme. I think the decision making tends to fall off when he's running outside zone, but when he
Hmm.
blockers that he can fall behind, his patience starts to take over and he gets lost behind his blocks. He's really good at getting skinny through tight creases. He's got to wait sometimes for that crease to open up as opposed to just like immediately looking for space, which is something you see with a lot of backs that come out of college. They will look to run to space. They won't look for that extra cutback lane, which I think is the difference between my number 5 and my number 4, which we'll get into at some point. But I had Judkins at 5, and uh, I believe you'll have an interesting guy at number 5 as well.
Yeah, so I mean, Jenkins for me, he's a little bit lower. Honestly, I wasn't really sure of what to expect like going into his film because I watched a good amount of Ohio State this past season, but just on like live viewings, I just felt like his output was like really inconsistent. I felt
Yeah,
like he just kind of didn't look like the same player that I kind of envisioned. I was excited about seeing him in what I would classify as a better environment at Ohio State, and I'm just not really necessarily sure if it translated to what I thought was like better film. I do think that there are times where he could be a little bit more patient. I think as well as like sometimes I don't think that Judkins is as twitchy as maybe I thought he was coming out. Like last year when I watched him coming out of the summer, I felt like he was a little bit more twitchy, a little bit more sudden, and I just didn't feel like he was that this past season. Now I will say like you're spot on with like the tenacity that he runs with. I mean, this dude is physical. He definitely like the stiff arm is outstanding. I mean, I think it's probably the best stiff arm in the class. He put some guys on some highlight reels this past season.
he's
So
consistently trying to finish too. Like he lowers
yeah,
his pads consistently at the second, first, third level, and that's just something I respect about his game. Like he loves to run the football. He
yeah, and
will embrace that contact.
there's like passing game impact too, like with what you were saying. Like the
Yes,
big thing is like it just like kind of something we definitely both have talked a lot about it, but agree on is, you know, as a pass protector, you can coach up like a guy's technique. You can help guys get more familiar with different schemes. Like that's part of like it's part of the evaluation process, but it's part of the game planning that goes on like week to week when you get into an NFL room. But you can't. I don't think you can really coach up a guy's like want to in pass protection, and that's like the number one thing I'm looking for with that. I have absolutely no qualms with Quinshon Judkins in that regard. Like that's a very easily translatable thing. But yeah, he didn't quite make my top 5. My number 5 running back, man. Like I said, it was a curveball because like I hadn't actually gotten to this dude's film until a couple of days ago, and I was just blown away. To be honest with you, I just didn't expect him to grade out this highly for me, and it's actually Damien Martinez from Miami. This is
okay.
someone that I scouted over the summer. I thought he was a good player at Oregon State, but then he got off to a really slow start. Miami was kind of wondering like what was really going on there, especially because they were red hot as an offense. Like Cam Ward's generating all this crazy buzz, you know, propelling himself into a top pick draft. I just look at Martinez, man, awesome frame. I think he's every bit of the 5'11", 6 foot, 225-pound range that he's listed at. You talk about a physical runner. This dude is a physical runner. His main objective is just he's going to wear defenses down and force them into submission. Like the things that I loved about his game, short yardage, goal line, end of game, like fourth quarter carries. This is the dude that you want with the rock in his hand.
Absolutely.
Um, I think the contact balance is really impressive. The way that he can deal out like these punishing blows on potential tacklers without needing to get like a full head of steam to do so or a runway to do so is just it's absurd, man. The Louisville game was kind of the turning point I felt like for his season. Louisville, my alma mater, so I was watching that game live. And I just remember, like in the fourth quarter, it looked like those guys were absolutely dreading having to tackle him on a play-to-play basis. I mean, I tweeted out a couple clips from that game earlier this morning, but before we hit record, and it's an outstanding performance for him. I think for a bigger back, I think he's a little bit shiftier. This is kind of where I started to turn on his evaluation and like be willing to put him in this regard is like, I think he's a little bit shiftier with lighter feet than I think I originally gave him credit for coming out of the summer, man. Like there's some really nice jump cuts. Like I saw him a couple times in the open field be able to make safeties miss at the third level, like when they were coming down to fill the alley. I just didn't expect that on film for him. He was mostly just like a check down option in the passing game. There was a one-handed snag that I saw against Georgia Tech that was really nice, catching the ball away from his frame. I'm really curious on how he catches the ball at the combine. That's something that I'll be looking for that could potentially alter his evaluation just because there's not a ton of production there. But he's going to be, I think, like capped out as a doubles hitter in the NFL. Like you can see, like whenever he gets to like the third level of the defense, like he's not looking to outrun guys. He's looking for the next guy that he can try to truck stick.
Yes.
Which it's playing to his strengths, but I just think that you have to acknowledge like this is not a dude who's going to rip off like 40, 50 yards. And explosive plays, they're at a premium. We're going to talk about that with a lot of the top guys in this class. I do think like he could be a tick late to process and pass pro, but again, that's something like a mental thing that I think can be like coached up. It'll sometimes mean he's late to kind of square guys up, which is, you know, a detriment to his game. He's a bit scheme dependent. You want this dude running inside the tackles. He's not somebody that I want out there on the perimeter, but I'm all in on like his angry demeanor. I think it can change like the complexion of a rushing attack and really the complexion of like how your offense feels, especially on early downs. If you want to be this kind of team that wins in the trenches and that has that demeanor. So yeah, Martinez literally, I mean, across all positions, one of the most surprising evals that I've had this entire cycle.
He's one of those guys that I had to completely I had kind of had a false conception over what type of player he was. It's interesting because you like the Miami tape more than you like the Oregon State tape. I went back to the Oregon State tape. They were a mostly like under center, outside zone type of team. And I was really impressed with Martinez's fluidity to be able to find those extra cutback lanes and consistently, you know, make the right read, which it was surprising because like I'm watching the Miami tape and they're running gap
Completely
and
different
inside
team.
zone. They're running gap and inside zone like every play. Like they run duo like I like so consistently. But you know, you watch him at Miami and the thing that just sticks out about him, it's his ability to get skinny through the A gap. Like he has such great patience to wait for that even the slightest crease to open, and he will just lower his pads right into the first level, second level, and you'll see that leg drive on contact just absolutely shine with his ability to just push the pile. And that's just something I love about Martinez's game. You mentioned he's number 5 for you. He's actually number 4 for me. And the reason
And I thought I was going to be high. I thought me putting him at 5 was going to be high. So I'm glad that I'm not crazy because Martinez was somebody that you and I haven't even we haven't even talked about him just like in our messages back and forth. We haven't even talked about him since last summer. So when I put him at this spot, I'm like, oh God, there's no telling what Nick's going to say about this. But
hey,
continue.
It turns out we're on the same page. But
Yeah.
I mean, the thing with Martinez, I was just surprised about his ability to create explosives. You mentioned that he's not always going to be that guy ripping off 50-yard runs consistently. But I had a conception about him that he was kind of similar to Najee Harris. And I think Martinez is a better athlete than I gave him credit for. And I want to apologize for that because watching Martinez's game, like, there are instances where he will get into the open field and you can see him, you know, start to create space between him and other defenders. Like there's a run against Florida State. There's a huge scrum that he just it gets involved in. And then all of a sudden he spins out from the backside and then he's getting chased down by Azareye'h Thomas down the field. And he rips off like a 60+ yard run. And I'm just like, those are the types of plays that I didn't see from Najee Harris, even in his time in Alabama. And I think just being able to see that from Martinez is so impressive. You mentioned the fluidity. His ability to make guys miss in space is actually even in just tight creases is so special. He can really sink and fly out of his cuts. and he can string multiple cuts in succession. Like there's a run against Syracuse where he meets the safety at the third level, jukes him out,
That's the one I was talking about.
sees the other one, jukes him out, and then what I love even more, he gets ready to lower the pads right into into the next third level defender, and he just starts driving him for another like 10 yards. And that to me is what I found so impressive about Martinez. His game is so like there's so much versatility to how he wins out in space, in tight creases, and the vision to me is the difference for me of why I like him more than I like Quinshon Judkins, for instance. But with Martinez, I do think the pass protection needs a little bit of cleanup. You mentioned his ability to not be as quite as like square to like the block to like the blitzer. I do think that tends to be his issue. It leads to him a lot of times like lunging his head and leaving his hands behind. He's not able to uncoil his hips consistently. But you see the want, and I really thought he improved a ton with his technique during the Senior Bowl week. Like he was consistently trying to shoot his hands first, and he was one of the best pass protecting backs like throughout both days of the Senior Bowl. So I really think Martinez is actually about as like scheme proof as can be. I don't think he's as reliant on scheme as a lot of other guys, which is why I have such a bold take on him being my number 4 ranked back. I think he's a really good back. I think he's one of the more complete guys in this class. I'm a big fan of him.
You mentioned like that play against Florida State and just consistently pushing the pile forward. There's a similar play against Louisville, kind of just like that. I think like he's one of those guys that I kind of like wrote down in my notes. Is like you don't want the refs to ever blow the whistle for
exactly
like, for him being like stopped, because like he always finds a way to kind of like continue to run his feet on contact, and it just I don't know. I can just see a role for him where he becomes this like fan favorite, and it's the fourth quarter of a divisional game and it's snowing outside and he's carrying like 4 or 5 guys on his back. The offensive line's pushing him forward, and then like the home crowd is just going absolutely berserk for him. So yeah, like I said, man, one of the more surprising evals that I've had in this class, but a really, really fun player that I think honestly like needs more love.
He did not have a single season of 200 attempts.
They should have ran the ball more. They really did. I mean, they
ran Mark Fletcher too much. That's what they did. That bothered me.
Yeah. Kind of moving on to my number 4 guy. This dude, I think I've done like a full circle because I was super high and then I really cooled off. And then I think I've came back around on from a vision standpoint. I thought the addition of Quinshon Judkins to the Ohio State backfield this year was the best thing that could have happened to Tre'Veyon Henderson. I thought it kept him fresh. He started to look more like the guy that kind of burst onto the scene as a true freshman for the Buckeyes offense. This past year, 7 yards per carry, double-digit touchdowns if you count the postseason. This dude's just instant offense, man. Like every time he's out there, he's doing something crazy. He's a tackle. An angle eraser was kind of the way that I kind of defined his game. Outstanding lateral agility, explosive. He's got the top gear that kind of makes him that true home run threat every time he touches the ball. He hasn't put the ball on the ground in 3 straight seasons, which is something that I wanted to talk about because there are other guys in this class that are kind of this. I don't want to call Henderson like a true like scat back, but there are some other like speed guys in this class, mainly like Bashal Tutin, who you and I both like as a player on day 3, but fumbles the ball way too often. That is not Henderson. This dude's extremely reliable with the rock in his hands. But the real upside, in my opinion, is what you could potentially do with him in the pass game. He is so reliable in pass protection. Both of the Ohio State backs, dude, they just block their tails off. I just think they're well coached. They both have that willingness. But Henderson in particular, I think he sorts out games really well. Just the technique, his posture, how he keeps his eyes up, just the way that he attacks blitzers is awesome. If I'm an offensive coordinator, I'm kind of dreaming about the ways that I can use him as a receiver. There are a couple of examples I want to bring up that kind of elevated him in terms of potential for me. He took a screen pass in the playoffs against Texas, 75 yards to the crib. And when you talk about the way that NFL defenses are playing right now, this is kind of where I've come full circle with him. everything is so limited on, like, we want to put a roof on the defense. We want to put a roof on the offense, and force them to, like, check the ball down and matriculate 10, 12, 13 play drives, right? Henderson, it only takes him one play to take it to the house. So I think that there is more value there in today's NFL than maybe there was previously. And then I look at, like, there was an example against Purdue earlier in the season. They actually split him out as a receiver to the right side of the field. He gets matched up with a linebacker in man coverage, and he kind of comes off with real nice tempo, kind of gives him a little slant and go, a little sluggo route, and they hit an explosive play. Would have been a touchdown if Will Howard didn't underthrow the ball. So I just think that there's upside here. I think that there are ways that you could use him out of the backfield in terms of, like, option routes, getting him involved, matched up against the linebacker. I couldn't help but think, like, when I heard Sean Payton talking about, like, they needed a joker in Denver. I know everybody's talked about, like, maybe that's Colson Loveland, maybe that's Tyler Warren. He's probably not going to be there. I thought, like, maybe, like, in round 2, if Tre'Veyon Henderson's there, like, that could be the joker. I mean, he had Reggie Bush in New Orleans. Like, I think that there are some carryover there with the way you can use him. There are times where I wish he was a little bit more patient. I think arm tackles, particularly behind the line of scrimmage, he was brought down a little bit too much on first contact for my liking. He's going to come in around 205 pounds. So I would imagine, there's going to be some consideration in terms of, like, the wear and tear you want on his body, concerns about the workload he can kind of take on. There's also, he has a history of foot injuries. I've been burned multiple times in the past, just trying to, like, I'm not a doctor, so I don't factor in, like, this stuff too much in terms of my grading scale, but it's going to be really important for him to go to Indy and have that foot check out well, because it's going to be something that, teams are going to wonder. But after 2 straight kind of down seasons at Ohio State, I thought he really took a step forward this past year, and I'm back in. I'm back in on the explosive playability. I know that, even this past year, I don't even know if he had a single game where he had more than 12 carries, but he was still a difference maker. And I think even at the NFL level, where you're seeing a lot more committee stuff, I think this dude could take 12 or 15 carries and he could still be a really dynamic player for your offense. So I'm in on him as the 4th best back in the class.
I definitely understand ranking Tre'Veyon Henderson in the top 5. You talk about the explosive playability, but more importantly, his ability to block is just, he is the best blocker in this class.
At 205 pounds.
Exactly. Like, he has the technique, he has the want, and you watch him sometimes, like, whenever they're doing run plays and he's the lead blocker, he's gonna get out in space and he's gonna look to finish a guy. And you see it so consistently with him.
Mm-hmm.
But you mentioned the contact balance, the ability to run through arm tackles is not quite to the standard that I typically hope for.
Yep.
But that's, for me, that's a huge, like, aspect for running backs. Like, if I'm ranking you in, like, the top 5 of this class, I preferably would want you to be, like, the one, like, the guy to handle your backfield. And I think Henderson is one of those guys who needs more of a committee, but in that committee, he can be special. There's been some comparisons to Jahmyr Gibbs. I think Gibbs has shown he can absolutely play without David Montgomery, and I'm not so sure Henderson has that same type of build. He's got a lighter hip build than more people want to, like, look at. Like, when they're comparing running backs, like, Henderson, to me, he's kind of skinnier down there. He actually, for an NFL comparison, I was trying to, like, come up with some guys, and you talk about his ability as a receiver and as a blocker. Joseph Adai back with Indianapolis, I really think that could actually be a good comparison.
Yeah, that could be a fun one
for his type of role. And we talked about explosive play capability. Adai had that in spurts, and I really think Henderson, it's going to take the right fit. And I think you mentioned Sean Payton. I think that's the perfect fit for him.
Yeah, just one more thing real quick on Henderson before we move on to your number 3. I think the thing with him that I think is notable is, I mentioned the ability to erase tackling angles from safeties. I mean, you take one small step in the wrong direction and it's over. And I think the big thing with him is the way that he can bend the corner when he gets to the perimeter. Like, he will be headed almost straight to the sideline, but instead of, like, having to take a few choppy steps to cut it upfield and maintain, like, inbounds leverage, he can hit that thing like full speed. And like you saw it that a
Absolutely.
couple different times this past season. So I don't know. I think he's a pretty special athlete for the position, and just the impact in the passing game is one of the reasons why I'm kind of willing to overlook some of the stuff that I think bothered me the past couple of years with the arm tackles and, you know, maybe some inconsistencies with playing through contact. But yeah, Gibbs not realistic. I think Gibbs just played a lot stronger. I know they're almost identical in size, but you saw Gibbs bounce off tacklers the way that I just don't see with Henderson. But that's okay. I still think he could be a good player. But who's your number 3 back?
Kaleb Johnson, Iowa.
Okay.
When it comes to like, we talk about scheme proof type of backs, this might be the most scheme specific back in this entire class. If a gap scheme heavy team drafts Kaleb Johnson,
right,
I don't think Kaleb Johnson's going to have a very good career. He is an outside zone runner through and through. He reads really well outside cutback lanes. He has that type of foot quickness, the ability to bend out of his cuts. You really see with like some backs, they like to string cuts together. He just kind of redirects his ankles, and he's able to just redirect, like, find like the backside cutback lane or keep going, front side. He's got such impressive, like, curvy linear speed, which is like the ability to just like translate like that horizontal momentum and just move it upfield. Like, you'll see him outrun guys like almost consistently, horizontally. And I think when you look at like just breakaway speed, Kaleb Johnson is some of the best breakaway speed in this class. Like, he will create huge explosives. There's a play against Michigan State where he houses it basically 80 yards on an outside zone. It's pretty much an encapsulation of his game. He's one of those guys, I don't think he handles first contact at the first level as well as others, and that's because he's a little more limited in the hips. He has to stop he has to almost come more to a full stop to like make, sink his hips and then cut laterally, which you don't typically like. You would rather see like, him be able to do that in way less steps.
Yep.
As opposed to like other guys. But the thing that makes it like great for him is the contact balance at all levels. Like, he's able to just run consistently forward. He gets skinny through tight creases. Like, his vision is so impressive on an outside zones panel. And you talk about his ability just to impact like the run game. He can be that guy to carry the ball like 250 times in a season. He is that type of player. He has that type of ability. And, we mentioned the ability to like bend out of his cuts. I really think he's a guy that was so underused as a receiver. I watch his check and release patterns like quite a lot, because they ran a lot of check and releases with him. They don't really ask him to block as much. And a lot of times he would end up just, getting sized up with the linebacker. I watch him move out in space, and I think he's got a lot of like untapped ability as a route runner. And the hands, there's a play against Iowa State. The ball gets like thrown like almost to his knee, like on the like he's just a swing pattern on this play. The ball gets thrown like right around his knee, and he has to like scoop it low, and then he's still able to transition and move upfield and gets like, 7-10 yards out of that. And I just thought that was such an impressive aspect of Kaleb Johnson's game that just went underutilized. So I really think in an outside zone scheme, like, he can be like elite, but we're talking such a scheme specific back. And that's what's really interesting. I talk about, scheme proof type of guys, but if you can be elite in one's type of scheme, I really see like that ability like translating. And I really think teams are going to have a great idea of what Kaleb Johnson does and doesn't do well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head really with his evaluation. I'll go ahead and talk about Kaleb just because Kaleb is, so I'm hedging a little bit here, but not because I'm not confident in my evaluations, but just because I think scheme matters so much for my 2 and 3 backs. I have Kaleb as kind of a 2A, and then I have another 2B back who I think is number 2 on your list. But in terms of like Kaleb, his evaluation, like just full transparency, this is like one of my favorite players in the entire class. There is a gracefulness about his game that I just really enjoy, man. Like watching him run the ball is like poetry in motion. You look at the production, like you talked about somebody that can carry a huge workload like from day one, and it's that we have proof of that concept, like because that's what he did at Iowa. Like we saw him literally carry the entire Iowa offense on his shoulders. 1,500 yards, 21 touchdowns this past fall, 4.42 yards after contact per rush. That was second best in the class among running backs with 200 carries behind only Ashton Jeanty. I make sure to bring that up because I think that there is a lot of discussion now, especially on social media, about his offensive line being so good, and they have some absolute dogs on that offensive line. I want to be very transparent about that. But Johnson uplifted the offensive line just as much as vice versa did. So I just want to make sure that people understand that. The film shows that too. But this is a wide zone savant, the best vision in the class for my money. He just perfectly treads that line between patience and decisiveness, like very few backs that I've seen in recent years. The feet are really light, especially for his size. I think he runs through arm tackles without losing steam. Very good contact balance, which you talked about to all three levels. He doesn't necessarily deal out a ton of power.
Yeah, he's not a powerful guy. Like I actually wrote him up for SIS like early on, and we have like power and then like contact balance. And I had like a high number for contact balance. I had a pretty low number for power though. Like he's not really like that type of guy who's going to lower his shoulder and like, make a forcible impact. But you talk about running through guys. Like he does that really well.
It's very different in terms of rushing style from the next guy we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
He has this really good contact balance where he absorbs hits and then stays on his feet and kind of keeps going. But like you said, like for someone that I don't think has, like, I don't think Kaleb Johnson's going to go out there and run a 4.4 in Indy here in a couple of days. I think that's left kind of some evaluators, not myself, to be very clear, to be concerned about his like top end speed. But dude, like he ripped off so many explosive runs this past year. I mean, dozens of explosive plays on his tape that we never saw from some of these other players that he's getting comped to pretty often. And I just think in limited opportunities, he showed that he was comfortable catching the ball away from his frame. You mentioned the low catch that he had. There was another one in the red zone where he's like running to the flat route. I think it might have been a check and release, or maybe it's just like a simple flat route, but he was catching the ball away from his frame. Shows pretty soft hands. Just the utilization of that wasn't necessarily part of their offense. He's only got 33 reps in pass pro this past season. I mean, it was really difficult to parse out what he could do in that regard. I would say the willingness is there. I think that some of the pickups that I saw on tape showed good football IQ and processing. But the technique needs to be refined though. And that's just an experience thing. So I think with the frame, you're optimistic about what it will look like. It's just, the natural upright rushing style. Like he's a glider. So he's not someone who's going to sequence moves together in a row very often. I think that he could be an effective gap scheme runner. Because when they did run some counter stuff, I felt like he was able to get skinny through the hole and make some things happen in that regard. But it would be a crime to the rest of humanity if he does not end up in an outside zone scheme right away, because I think he has like real difference maker potential and somebody that can be like a real bell cow for that style of offense. So I'm really optimistic about Kaleb at the next level. So, and he's someone that I hope ends up in Pittsburgh. Just full disclosure, I know you and I both feel that way. And maybe there's a mock draft out there that has that pairing. Well, who knows? Link in bio. But let's go. Let's talk about your number two back, man. Like who's your number two back?
Number two, you talk about how it's pretty close between 2 and 3. For me, Omarion Hampton showed that he could just be the absolute rock when you take away his quarterback. We talk about like the ability to be that offense. He was that UNC offense. Like we talk about like what Ollie Gordon did last year, the year before in 2023 as the Doak Walker Award winner in such a bad offense. He just did. Omarion Hampton basically just did that this year in 2024. 1,600 yards, huge runs, consistently breaking off like chunk gains. You talk about like he's more of a gap scheme fit than anyone else, I would say, because he's a little more limited in the hips. I wouldn't say he's stiff, he's just more functional in that regard. And you see with his footwork, like he's not going to string a ton of cuts in succession, but with him, he just doesn't cover a lot of ground out of his cuts. Like he's just not extremely explosive. But what really makes up for it is his efficiency. He's able to keep his feet, like his footwork is a lot better than people will give it credit for, and it's one of the things that I think allows him to potentially work in other schemes. Because I think when you look at his vision, I think he knows how to read outside zone. I think he knows how to read inside zone gap. He understands it. He has patience. He's the best runner at getting skinny, and that's why I love him in a gap scheme more than anything, because he will just go right through that A gap, find the slightest crease, and then he's just like off to the second, third level. And you just talk about it. He is a hammer, an absolute hammer at the second and third level. He will dish out that contact. He is going to, lead his shoulder into you. He is going to stiff arm you into oblivion. Yeah, he can make you miss in space, but that's not really his game. It's not like his strength. But the fact that he showed that he can kind of do a little bit of both is why I have him at 2 and not 3. I think Hampton has one of the more complete games out of anyone in this class. I might be higher on his pass protection than most people. I really think there's he has like the strongest like base out of anyone of the running backs in this class. And it's because he's got like one of the bigger hip builds out of anyone. He's just able to absorb that contact extremely consistently. You talk about, just being able to move a pile in like those tight, in those like, those scrums. There's like a play against Wake Forest where they do like a cut block. He jumps over, meets the guy like in the air, and then he just turns his legs and drives through the rest of the team, and he gets it into the end zone for a touchdown. Like you talk about like the short yardage ability. Hampton is that hammer. And as a route runner, I really think he's one of the most underrated route runners, and he's got some underrated hands. Like he keeps his hands so consistently tight. He chooses the correct attack method. He's not consistently, trying to catch underhanded. He's looking to go overhand. And I think it allows him to be consistent as an underneath check down option. He's not like crazy explosive, but with him, the breakaway speed, I really think there's a lot more there than people will give him credit for. I think he's more of like a high 4.4s, like low 4.5s type of athlete. The player he reminds me of the most, and I might be just completely off base, is Nick Chubb, because Chubb was kind of similar in that regard. Chubb wasn't a really like explosive lateral athlete, but he was super efficient with maximizing his footwork, and he could break off those explosive gains. He would absolutely finish you with his shoulder, initiate that contact, and he had the vision to be able to execute like pretty much any scheme that was asked of him, even if he wasn't necessarily like the greatest fit for it. And I kind of see Hampton in a similar mold. That's why he's my RB2, and he's one of my favorite players in this entire class. I'm just so impressed that like after having Drake May at quarterback the year before, he goes out there as the absolute guy at UNC, like forces over 70 missed tackles forced according to Pro Football Focus. He was the hammer. He was the guy. And that to me says a lot about the type of player he can be.
Yeah. I mean, I would just say for the top 3 guys on this list, like we talk about proof of concept and their ability to come in and like be the engine of an offense. It's already been there. And the things that these guys were asked to do, that's why we're so bullish, I feel like, on the top end of this class and how it's going to translate is all 3 of these guys are in less than ideal situations from a quarterback standpoint and from a passing game standpoint, where they're facing like a lot of loaded boxes, and everybody knows that they are the dude. And throughout the entire season, no matter how you game planned against them, they were equally effective. And I think it just speaks volumes to the type of prospects that we're talking about. I think, Hampton, the way that I kind of describe him is like he's a human bumper car. True 3-down back at the next level from day one. This dude is the definition of like what it means to run behind your pads.
Yes.
I saw him play a couple times live this season. Honestly, Carolina was pretty bad, so I tried to avoid watching that offense. But I went back and watched 5 games for this podcast. I don't think I recalled a single time where this dude did not fall forward. He wasn't knocked backwards a single time. He's just the play strength outstanding. He falls forward to create that hidden yardage. I think the contact balance is pretty absurd. Guys just bounce off of him. When he gets to the second level, it almost looks like he has this like magnetic field around like the Madden ring where guys like go to tackle him, and then the next thing you know, their helmet's bouncing off the turf. I mean, he's just an absolute terror to try to get down on the ground. I think I'm honestly a little bit more bullish that on the straight line acceleration that even you are. I think he's a little bit fast. I think he's going to run I think he could run like a 4.45. I really do think he's that level of an athlete when he actually gets to striding out. He's an expert, I think, at playing kind of that cat and mouse game on those duo runs. So on duo, you're normally reading like the Mike linebacker play side. And basically, whichever gap he fills into, you're going to follow your double teams as kind of try to hit the open lane. And he consistently won that matchup. Every Mike linebacker like hated to see this dude coming downhill. I think that when he's in the backfield and there's immediate penetration, like he has the ability, as long as he's not like really gotten going yet, he has the ability to kind of jump cut really efficiently, with what you were kind of saying. Reliable pass protector. I really have in my notes that he's able to uncoil his hips, especially like get low, play with a good base. 2.7 career drop rate. Pretty impressive. Like I said, without Drake May, like not only was he the engine, like he was the entire vehicle of this offense. And I just thought it was really impressive the way he carried himself. I absolutely love the disposition that he plays with. This is a no-nonsense runner. I wouldn't try to change his play style for anything. I don't see a very creative player. Some of that is like I'm not as impressed with like the lateral agility. I do think he's a little bit tight. I think, you know, when he gets into the second level, like he's just trying to like run over people every single time.
Yes.
And I think, to be fair, it worked at the college level, and I do think he's going to have success with it at the next level too, because he's so strong. But I do think, you know, his best work does come in between the tackles. He can run outside zone, and like because he's explosive enough and he's got the short area burst to kind of get through rushing lanes. Most of the wide zone stuff ended up hitting front side. I think the thing with him is like when you ask him to make these like sharp cutbacks, I think that's where you see some of the constrictions with his lower half. I mean, there was a couple times where they would be running like a wide zone, like out of the gun or whatever, and like you're getting way far outside the tackles. And he would get to his top speed pretty quickly. But like then when he was kind of trying to either make a guy miss or kind of cut back a little bit as he got to the sideline, he would almost have to come real choppy stepped. And then like there were times where he fell down because like when he was trying to make those sharp cuts. So I think there are some limitations to the way that he's built. Like he's just a straight line runner. And like I don't think that there's necessarily anything wrong with that. He can still be a really, really effective player. I just think it's a limitation for him. So I wouldn't say that he couldn't do outside zone, but it's kind of like the Kaleb Johnson thing for me, where it's like we would be doing the football world a disservice if we didn't put KJ in an outside zone system. I think we'd be doing an equal disservice if we don't put Omarion Hampton into a downhill gap scheme duo type of offense where we can really see him unleash terror on linebackers with the contact balance and with the raw power that he possesses. So pretty impressive runner, man. Like I thought his film this season was every bit as good as it was last year. You mentioned the stuff as a receiver. I think like he can do everything you want him to out of the backfield.
He cut back on the fumbles too. Like
yeah,
that was
just one. I think one fumble this year, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I thought one fumble this year. Speaking of fumbles, we'll go into the number one prospect in the class. I don't necessarily think that this dude needs a ton of introduction or maybe a lengthy scouting report because I think everybody's pretty familiar with this cat, but I'll let you kind of gush about Ashton Jeanty before we get out of here.
I think the most impressive thing about Ashton Jeanty is that he was consistently setting betting lines at like 190 yards, and it was consistently hitting for a while. But
still hitting the over with flying colors.
Yeah, exactly. basically broke the PFF record for missed tackles forced in a season. It was over like 150 or something like that. And yeah, you watch the tape, it checks out. He is not just a hammer, he's able to just absorb contact so consistently. Guys just bounce off of him. He's got insane buoyancy for a player his size. Like, in a way, I'd say it's kind of like Alvin Kamara in a sense, but the difference between him and Kamara, I think Jancy just has way better straight line speed than Alvin Kamara did. You see him be able to consistently churn out explosive play after explosive play. There's no scheme he can't run. He's very good moving laterally. He's got great feet, great hips. He's able to read outside zone. He's able to get, skinny behind his pads. It's ad nauseum with this class. We talk about the same things, but it is absolutely with almost every single guy in this top 5. They know how to run skinny, and Jancy knows how to run skinny with absolute authority. He is a guy that will make first level defenders not want to tackle him because of how hard it is to reach down and get a 5'9" bowling ball that is just absolutely moving at full speed. And you talk about Jancy, the year before, he was better as a receiver. Like, he was so used as a receiver. He was so underutilized as a receiver this year. You talk about the ability to catch the ball out of the backfield. He'll be able to run, you'll see him run a ton of rail routes at the next level as on mesh concepts. And he's probably going to make whatever linebacker is covering him absolutely miserable, just trying to cover him. You talk about his ability to, make guys miss. It translates to his routes. He will route you up. He will size you up at the top of his break. He will have you thinking one way and then he'll go the other. He is really good at just manipulating his hips. There's just not a lot of things that Jancy isn't good at. Literally, the thing that you pointed out, it's fumbles. This past year, he had so many fumbles, especially against Penn State. I don't know what happened in that game, but there was just a complete malfunction with his ball security. And it's not necessarily like a technical thing. Like, he's holding the ball in the right hands, each time. It's just sometimes he's just losing grip on the ball. And maybe that has some more to do with the amount of carries he had. I mean, he had 360 something attempts this season, something crazy like that, which is just unheard of. We talked about the fumble rate. The fumble rate wasn't even concerning, though, is the crazy thing. You look at the amount of fumbles, you compare it though to the amount of carries, and the rate actually wasn't nearly as bad. But I really have no qualms over Ashton Jancy's ball security. I can deal with that if he's just able to be an absolute hammer and carry my offense. We talk about, pass protection. I thought he grew so much in this area this year. I thought he did a really good job of just being able to absorb contact. He kept his base a lot more square and allowed him to be able to just absolutely absorb the contact, from blitzing level linebackers. Jancy, there's really not many issues with his game, and I really think he's about as complete of a back as you'll see come out of the college level.
Yeah, I mean, you said everything that needed to be said. Not that we needed to convince anybody listening to this podcast about how special this kid is, but I mean, there's no such thing as a perfect can't miss prospect. We see it every year. Guys get billed like this, regardless of position. But I struggle to find a reality where Ashton Jeanty's not a really good player at the next level, barring some really unfortunate injury stuff. He was my running back one coming out of the summer. That's a take that I'm really proud of because I feel like he parlayed a really strong 2023 into a historic 2024. One of the best seasons I've ever seen for a college back, just full stop. Low center of gravity, really explosive through the hole. He's got very good speed. The contact balance is absurd. Never tackled by the first guy. He can stop on a dime. He can make guys miss. He can string moves together in succession. He can go power to speed. He plays with great tempo. There's zero delay in any of his decision-making or his transitions. Unlike some of the other guys that I feel like he's getting put into that upper echelon of running back draft prospects to come out over the past decade, like a Saquon Barkley. He's not a guy who gets by strictly off of his athletic ability. He's not a guy who is too bounce happy. He's got very good vision. There are very few like poor decisions that are on his tape. Everything's precise. It hits the right gap on time. He's patient. He sets his blocks up perfectly. Simply put, like he gets what's blocked for him, and then he has the capability of making things happen after the first defender gets there too. You mentioned the historic missed tackle numbers, like 150 missed tackles for us this past season. I mean, it's just the amount of creation capacity that this dude has is unreal. He's got really soft hands. You mentioned that he wasn't used as much as a pass catcher this past season. That was really just because, I mean, they needed the dude to carry the ball every single play so he could will them to the playoffs. And that's exactly what he did. I think the pass protection stuff was an area that he took a significant step forward. Like you mentioned, he's just ready-made in every single aspect, man, to make an impact from day one. And I think beyond just like making an impact, this dude can be like a potential like star, all pro caliber player from day one. I really think he's that special. My only negative was the fumbles. He put it on the ground 5 times in 2023. Some of that was, I thought, technique stuff. In terms of like just not being as diligent about like knowing when to cover up when he's entering tight spaces, getting the ball punched out a little bit loose with his technique. And this past year, it was better. Like he had 2 fumbles up until that playoff game against Penn State. Then he fumbled twice. But again, we're talking about 4 fumbles in 398 touches or something like that. I mean, it's like you mentioned the rate, and that's why it's important perspective to put into it. It's not a Bashaw Tootin thing where he's got 5 fumbles and like less than 200 carries. You know what I'm saying? Like it's not a completely thing where you're going to red flag a guy for that. I think there's also like maybe some concerns about the high usage. Like he is going to come out with 800 touches or so, and that's worth noting. But I also think you have to give him credit, and this is one thing I think that people are maybe underselling a little bit, because of how durable he's been, how competitive he's been, and how highly conditioned he is when he's on the field. I mean, this dude took a significant workload and was so freaking efficient this past season in an offense that no one was scared of anything else that Boise had, and this dude still willed him to the playoffs. You could say what you want about competition level. I do not care. I watched this dude in week 2 against Oregon completely dominate. Yeah. Oregon has some really good defenders on that side of the ball. He was by far the best player on either team, on either side of the ball that night. And that was kind of the start of what was truly a special season. So Ashton Jeanty, one of the best players in this class, regardless of position. With the way that the NFL is kind of trending, we're getting back to the cyclical nature of things. The run game is kind of back in vogue. Have no issue taking this dude in the top half of the first round.
I'd love him at 21.
He's going to be it.
Yeah. I'd love him at 21.
But if teams in the top 20 don't want to take him in the top 20, that's fine. We know a team that could use him at 21. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Real quick, when I was making sure to get my list together for the top 5, I did not realize that my entire top 5 was in the 2022 running back recruiting class. The entire class. And here's some of the names you'll hear like later on. Like Jordan James is in this class. Like there are guys like Jaden Ott who didn't declare. Dylan Sampson who did declare that we did not get to. I'm actually still watching more film on him as we speak. Damien Martinez was like 35 in like the Rivals rankings. And he was like a 3-star recruit despite being 5'10", 220. Ollie Gordon was 41. Kaleb Johnson was 43. Like there's so many names. Trevor Etienne's 46. There's so many guys for the 22 recruiting class. It's group.
I mean, there's a lot of, you mentioned the guys, like just the depth of the class, like we're not going to go into in this particular episode, but guys that we've already talked about on the podcast, like Devin Neal, like guys like that are going to probably go in like the 4th round of the draft, and I think can come in and like carry the ball from day one. Like maybe not be like a RB1, but be part of a committee and be a valued part of your offense. And it's a pretty special group. We will do more of these like positional rankings as we get further and further into the process. I will be in Indianapolis. I leave in a couple days, so I'm excited about that. bring you guys more content from that. So just on your way out, please make sure that you like the video, subscribe to the channel, drop us a comment. Let us know what positional rankings you guys want to see in the future. We'll try to at least hit on the big positions that are particularly, big interest of Steelers fans and what Pittsburgh kind of needs in the draft, but definitely open to doing more than that. Of course, we'll probably do quarterbacks at some point because that's kind of just a hot topic. But as always, we really appreciate the continued support, and we will check you guys later. Peace and love.